Hey boys, it's HarmNone. Today, we're going to be ranking every Grotti vehicle in Grand Theft Auto Online in tier list form. Now, if you guys have never seen one of my tier list videos before, there is something that you must know. This list is 100% factual and cannot be argued with. Everything that I say in this list is 100% factual and cannot be disputed in any way. If you accept these terms and conditions, we can move into the video. If not, you should exit off of the video immediately. With that being said, guys, let's get into it. We're going to start off with F tier. Now, don't say that I didn't warn you. To start off with, we have the Grotti X80 Proto. Now, the X80 Proto goes for $2.7 million in Grand Theft Auto Online, and this car is literally broken. Yes, that's right. The Grotti X80 Proto is a broken vehicle, and I'm going to explain to you guys what I mean by that. And this guy's in the way, unfortunately. Oh, okay, hold on. And there we go. That's more like it. And this guy knows too. He knows too much as well. Give me one sec, boys. This guy's still alive? What? As I was about to say, the X80 is completely broken. Now, depending on which direction on the map you are driving, the X80 will behave differently. That is because on the back of the car, as you guys can see as I turn, we have this active arrow part right above the exhaust. Now, for some reason, Rockstar made it so that only one of those flaps, to my understanding, actually does something to impact the car's downforce. So, when you're traveling up the highway on this side of the map and you make right-hand turns, you will get downforce. However, if you are traveling up this side of the map and you make right turns, you will not get the downforce bonus. It's something very similar to that. I might have nailed it on the head there. It's honestly very confusing to understand, but you can actually feel this with the X80 even at the airport here. As you guys can see, watch this, when I turn left, the back end of the car will start to slide out. However, when I turn right, the back end of the car will not slide out, which is very, very interesting, and it actually affirms this point. And this point was raised by Bruffy1322. If you guys are interested in the specifics of this, he has made a video going over it on his channel. It's a very good video. It's very informative, and you guys should definitely check it out if you're interested to know a little bit more in depth than I'm going to go in this video. So the X80 costs $2.7 million, and it is a broken car. This thing's performance is not very good, and you will not win any supercar races with this thing unless you're playing against a bunch of X80 Protos, and that's it. Or a bunch of cars that are just slower than this thing, but for the most part, if you use an X80 Proto, you're gonna get smoked. It's a cool looking car and it's got a bit of cool customization, but that's really about it. So for that reason, and because it's broken, it is in F tier, which I know is going to upset some people, but that's just where I put it. So that's where I put it. We're going to move on to the next vehicle with an F tier. Next up, we have the Grotti Brioso 300. Now this thing goes for $457,000 if you have the trade price unlocked, and if you do not have the trade price, this thing goes for $610,000. Now this car does actually have a bit of customization, but for the most part it is a pretty boring vehicle and it's not really noteworthy. Now if you're a fan of Fiat 500s in real life, or Fiat in general I guess, you might really like this car. But for the majority of people, the Brioso 300 is going to be a disappointment and pretty underwhelming. This thing's within the compacts category, and it is one of the slowest vehicles in the entire category. You're not going to win any races with this thing, and the performance overall is very, very bad, or at least very, very mid-tier. Now it does have a little bit of customization you can do and stuff like that, but for most people, the Brioso 300 is not going to be a very good car. Anyway guys, that is it for F tier. We're going to move on to C tier. To start off C tier, we have the Grotti Stinger. Now this thing goes for $850,000 in Grand Theft Auto Online, and it is within the sports classic category. Now the Stinger is a pretty nice looking car, I have to say. I do actually really like this thing, and I want to make that perfectly obvious. However, the Stinger is just not that great of a car, unfortunately. It's not very quick in a straight line, it doesn't really have very good performance, the handling is not very good either, and it's definitely not going to win you any races within the sports classic category. Now as a car to cruise around in free mode, it's not very bad, but it still doesn't have very good handling or very good performance overall, so it's not going to be super fun to drive, and it also has absolutely zero customization that can be done to it, so it's kind of a boring car. And for $850,000, you could spend your money a little bit better than on the Grotti Stinger. That's pretty much it for the Stinger and the start of C tier. Let's move on to the next vehicle within C tier. Next up, we have the Grotti GT500. Now, this is actually a car that I really like and I really respect it. However, it's not a very good car. Now, the GT500 goes for $785,000, and for that price you do get a pretty cool car. However, it doesn't have much customization and it doesn't have that great of performance. With that being said, it's still a very fun car to drive. It does handle really nicely. However, acceleration wise, it's not that great, and top speed wise, it's not that great either. This thing is of course within the sports classic category, which is a pretty competitive category in Grand Theft Auto Online. So as far as racing goes, you're definitely not going to win anything with this car. As a cruising car for free mode, it's not that bad. However, it doesn't have very much customization, so you can't make it very unique, unfortunately. So it's a little bit boring in my opinion, at least. Overall, I feel like it's a good C tier car and it's not a bad car. I don't want anyone to think that I don't like this thing. However, there are just better vehicles. And with the Grotti GT500, we are done with C tier, so it's time to move into B tier. To start off B tier, we have the Grotti Vision. Now this thing goes for $2,250,000, and for that price you do get a pretty cool and very unique supercar. Now the Vision is not going to win you any races, unfortunately. I know it probably looks like it's going to win you races, but unfortunately it's just not that fast of a car. Now that's not to say it is a bad car, not everything is about racing, however performance really does matter. Now the Vision is a pretty good car. I do really like this thing. It has great customization options. It's a really fun car. However, once you get up to a certain speed, this thing just kind of stops accelerating, which is really annoying. And like I mentioned, the handling is not very great on this thing either. It's good enough, but it's definitely not this thing's strongest suit. However, I would say that the acceleration is outshined by the handling, which is probably not a good thing because the handling is not that great either. The top speed on this car is also pretty piss weak, which kind of sucks, and unfortunately the Vision is just not that great of a car, especially given the price, which is pretty costly at $2.25 million. The Vision's cool, but it's not $2.25 mil cool. So for that reason, it's at the bottom of B tier. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the Grotti Stinger GT. Now, the Stinger GT is a really nice car. I really do like this thing, and it's basically just better than the Stinger regular version in pretty much every single way. It has better performance, however, it doesn't have any customization still, which is pretty annoying. It does cost an extra $25,000, and I would say the extra 25 grand is pretty worth it because this thing actually does have some pretty good handling, and the acceleration is definitely better than the regular Stinger. Now, you're still not going to win any races with the Grotti Stinger GT. It is a very nice car to cruise around in free mode. It's also a pretty good looking car. It doesn't really need that much customization, so it doesn't really matter too much about the customization. It's still just a very nice car. The Stinger GT is definitely a car that I would recommend if you have some extra money lying around in GTA. It's a very fun car to drive, and it's a nice one to have. But that's pretty much it for the Stinger GT. Let's move on to the next car in B tier. Next up in B tier, we have the Grotti Cheetah. This thing goes for $650,000, and it is an OG supercar in Grand Theft Auto Online. Now, the Cheetah is actually one of my favorite cars in the entire game. I actually really do like this thing. It's got some pretty good customization, and the performance is pretty good overall. Definitely not going to win any races, but it is still a pretty fun car to drive around in free mode, so that's always nice. On top of that, the Cheetah does have some good customization, albeit not as many options as some of the cars that are going to be upcoming on this list, but it does have some, which is always nice. For being an OG supercar in Grand Theft Auto Online, I do feel like the Cheetah has actually aged pretty well, albeit it's not the prettiest looking car ever, and I know that, but it is still a pretty nice car regardless. And I do feel like it is definitely deserving of being in B tier at least. I was tempted to put it a little bit higher, but I feel like B tier is truly where it belongs. That's pretty much it for the Grotti Cheetah. Let's move on to the next vehicle in B tier. And finally, to end off B tier, we have the Grotti Turismo R coming in at $500,000. This was the first supercar to ever be added into Grand Theft Auto Online, and even to this day, it is still a very good performing supercar, and it will beat pretty much every single OG supercar in the entire game, which is pretty impressive. And for only 500k, I mean, you can do the math. It's better than the Adder on a track. It's better than the Entity on a track. Those cars are definitely more expensive. However, there are some other cars in the game that will beat this thing that are also a pretty affordable price. So, but regardless, you cannot take away the fact that this thing is $500,000 and it's got some pretty good customization options and it's got great performance. The supercars category is pretty packed in GTA and the Turismo is not even close to the bottom of it. So it is pretty impressive. And that is it for B tier, guys. Let's move on to the first car to start off A tier. To start off A tier, we have the Grotti Bestia GTS, coming in at $610,000, which seems to be a pretty popular price point for Grotti vehicles in GTA, which is kind of interesting. Now, the Bestia GTS is one of the only hatchback sports cars in Grand Theft Auto Online, which is pretty cool. On top of that, it's one of the only Grotti vehicles that is all-wheel drive, which is also pretty cool. This thing is hugely overlooked in Grand Theft Auto Online these days, and it honestly is a really, really cool car. It's got pretty decent performance. Again, still not going to win any races with this thing. As a free mode car, it is really, really good, and it also has some good customization that you can do to it to make it a little bit unique and make it more of your own. Overall, the Bestia GTS for $610k is a fantastic car. Definitely a car that I would like to see get some more love in Grand Theft Auto Online. That's pretty much it for the Bestia GTS, guys. Let's move on to the next vehicle in A tier. Next up, we have the Grotti Furia, coming in at $2.7 million without the trade price unlocked, and $2,050,000 with the trade price unlocked. Now, the Furia is a car that has a bit of a divided community behind it. The Furia, to some people, is one of the best supercars, and the Furia, to other people, is one of the supercars that you stay away from. In my opinion, I actually really like the Furia. I like the customization. I like how this thing performs. However, I do appreciate and understand why people do not like this thing, although I don't fully understand it. Now, a big part of the Furia is people seem to think that this car handles really, really poorly, which I honestly do not understand. I cannot understand it for the life of me, but there are a lot of people out here that say that the Grotti Furia is a bad handling car. Now, I genuinely don't get this. Now, the Furia is not going to win you any races. This thing is not within the top 10 fastest supercars in the game. However, it is pretty close. It does have an active rear spoiler, which I think is a really, really cool feature with this thing. And of course, the spoiler is actually functional when it's up. Again, like I mentioned before, it has tons of customization as well. You can make this thing look absolutely insane. Like you can see, mine looks pretty nuts, but you can go even crazier than I've gone. Overall, the Furia is definitely a car that is talked about a lot by the community. I personally love this thing, however, you may not. So for that reason, I have put it in A tier. Anyway, guys, that is it for this thing. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the Grotti Cheetah Classic. Now, the Grotti Cheetah Classic goes for $865,000, which is a pretty reasonable price considering just how damn good that this thing is. This is the second fastest sports classic car in the entire game. This thing also has absolutely amazing customization that you can do to it to make it super unique and super your own. It has good handling, good acceleration, and okay top speed. There's really nothing to dislike about the Grotti Cheetah Classic. This thing is awesome in pretty much every single way. Overall, the Cheetah Classic is a fantastic car, and I would highly recommend picking this thing up. That is it for the Cheetah Classic, guys, and that is it for A tier. Let's move on to the official best vehicles that Grotti has made in Grand Theft Auto Online. To start off S tier, we have the Grotti Carbonizer. This thing goes for $195,000, and it is one of the best cars in Grand Theft Auto Online, and definitely one of my favorite cars. This is one of the only convertible Grotti vehicles in the entire game, and I'm pretty sure that the Carbonizer is a universally loved vehicle. I have never met anybody who dislikes the Grotti Carbonizer in Grand Theft Auto Online. Everybody, if they don't like this thing, at least respects the Carbonizer. And it's also really, really cool because it's one of the only hardtop convertible vehicles in the entire game, which is, of course, a really nice feature to have. The Carbonizer also has pretty good performance. You're not going to win any races with this thing, but it's a really fun car to drive. This thing drifts, it does it all, it does donuts, pretty much anything that you can ask of the Carbonizer, it will do it. Maybe not as good as some other vehicles, but it will do it. The Carbonizer is definitely one of the best bang for your buck cars in the entire game. Obviously, costing only $195,000 is amazing, and this thing actually does have a tiny bit of customization that you can do to it. The Carbonizo truly is one of the best Grotti vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online, and not only Grotti, but one of the best vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online. So that's it for the start of S tier. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the Grotti Brioso RA. This thing goes for $155,000, making it one of the cheapest cars on this entire list. I think it is actually the cheapest car on the entire list. Now, this is the second fastest compact vehicle in Grand Theft Auto Online, and interestingly enough, the Brioso RA is actually getting an HSW upgrade on the expanded and enhanced edition of Grand Theft Auto Online. So this thing might actually be the new, technically fastest compact car in the entire game. We will have to see. Unfortunately, it's not quite out yet. Brioso RA does have really good handling, pretty good acceleration, and an okay top speed for being a compact car. Overall, the Brioso is a pretty cool vehicle. It has some good customization. It's pretty neat. That's really all I have to say about this thing. It's pretty good. On to the next vehicle within S tier. Next up in S tier, we have the Grotti Italy RSX. Now, I put this thing here because, well, I felt like I kind of had to. I know a lot of the community really loves the Grotti Italy RSX. This thing is definitely a fan favorite, I will say. Now, this car is another Grotti vehicle that's actually broken. The RSX, if it worked properly, would actually be the fastest sports car in Grand Theft Auto Online. However, Rockstar actually messed up when they made this thing and made the downforce modifier not the same on this car as every other car from its DLC that it came out with, meaning that the Grotti Italy RSX could actually be the fastest sports car in the entire game. However, Rockstar made a mistake, very similar to what they did with the X80, albeit not as detrimental. This thing still has a downforce modifier, but it's just not active at the right moments, so it's a bit unfortunate. Now, the RSX does have pretty bad handling as a result of this. However, it is pretty quick in a straight line, and it does actually have a pretty decent top speed. However, when it comes to racing, this thing will get beaten pretty much every single time by some other cars in the sports category, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. Now, the biggest problem with the Grotti Italy RSX is, of course, well, it's broken, but on top of that, this is also one of the most expensive sports cars in the entire game, if not the most expensive sports car in the entire game. This thing without the trade price comes in at $3,500,000, which is an absurd amount of money to pay for a car in Grand Theft Auto Online, in my opinion. And when you do have the trade price, this thing goes for $2.6 million, which is still a crazy price for this vehicle. Now, it is good, has lots of customization, it's cool, looks great, all of that stuff, but it is insanely expensive, and it is broken. So, the Italy RSX is in S tier. Honestly, it probably could have been in A tier if I was being completely honest, but like I said, kind of felt like I had to put this thing in S tier. That's pretty much it for the Grotti Italy RSX. Let's move on to the next vehicle in S tier. Next up in S tier, we have the Grotti Turismo Classic. Now, this is the fastest sports classic car in the entire game, meaning it gets a pretty good position in S tier. This thing is absolutely awesome, and on the expanded and enhanced edition of the game, it has an HSW upgrade, meaning it's even faster. Now, the Turismo Classic goes for $705,000, so for that price, you get the best sports classic car in the game. It is actually a little bit cheaper than the Grotti Cheetah Classic, which is the second best car in the game in the sports classic category, so this thing does have an advantage, both on the performance side and on the pricing side of things. The Turismo Classic is based off of a Ferrari F40 in real life, so it's a pretty awesome car to have in Grand Theft Auto Online. I am a huge fan of this thing, and it's got some really nice customization options that you can do to it, so of course that is great to have. Turismo Classic is my go-to sports classic car for racing. This thing has won me a lot of races, and it's a very good car. I can confirm that, absolutely. The Turismo Classic is definitely a car that I recommend picking up, especially if you want to do racing, but even if you just want a car for free mode, the Turismo Classic is pretty awesome. Anyway guys, that is it for the second best vehicle made by Grotti in Grand Theft Auto Online. Let's move on to the best one. And the number one vehicle made by Grotti in Grand Theft Auto Online is, of course, the Italy GTO. Now, the Italy GTO is the best sports car in Grand Theft Auto Online. I don't want to hear any arguing from RSX fanboys. The Italy GTO is an absolute monster. This car is ridiculously fast. It is actually better than most cars in the supercars category. Only about the top 10 supercars in the game are actually faster than this thing is around a track, which is pretty insane. Now, the Italy GTO has some pretty crazy customization options as well, which is really awesome. It accelerates like it's fallen off a cliff. It sounds great, insanely good handling, and a pretty respectable top speed. And all of this is pretty crazy considering that this car costs less than $2 million, coming in at $1,965,000. And for that price, you get a car that is much better than the Italy RSX while costing almost half as much, which is pretty nuts. The Italy GTO is my go-to car for sports class racing in Grand Theft Auto Online, and this thing has won me an insane amount of races. I absolutely love the Italy GTO. It has definitely earned its spot as the #1 vehicle made by Grotti in Grand Theft Auto Online. Anyway guys, that is it for the Grotti tier list in Grand Theft Auto Online. Let me know what you guys thought of my list in the comments down below. Of course, tell me that I'm right. If not, well, don't comment. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. It definitely helps me out. I appreciate it a lot. Dislike if you didn't, of course. Subscribe if you guys are new, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, take care. Peace.